So apparently there's this guy named JD Vance, and he is apparently like one of the contenders to be vice president. It's crazy. He looks like, I don't know, the boy from Family Circus, like all grown up. Like that's he looks like a comic book, or not a comic book, like a cartoon strip child grown up. Like, this is Dennis the Menace, like 40 years on, you know? I don't know. Like, I've been thinking it. I'm just saying it. All right. Also, can we just, can we just take a quick look here at, one of what I'm sure is going to be JD Vance's favorite game. You know, just apropos of nothing, that this trailer dropped today, and it's basically been all I can think about.
Hey there! They say home is where the heart is. And that's especially true for this next game.
That's right. Household objects, appliances, and even concepts turn into eligible love interests in Date Everything, a game in which you can, in fact, date pretty much everything.
With 100 dateable characters, there are plenty of unconventional partners to choose from. Fall madly in love with Fabrizio the cabinet. Become besties with Shelly the shelf. Or come to despise Doug, your, overwhelming sense of existential dread.
I think I'll pass on Doug. Can I fall in love with a lamp?
No way! Lux the lamp is all mine! But did you know that you could even date the game itself? Why don't I introduce you to Textbox-chan?
Engage in flirtatious, branching dialogue with these fully voiced characters as you get to know them and form meaningful relationships.
Perish the thought, swashbuckler.
I drive as quick as my whip.
Bring your best dating game because your choices could result not just in love, but also in friendship, or even disdain.
Find the object of your affection when Date Everything launches on Nintendo Switch October 24th.
Okay. Number one, this game looks dope as hell, and I want to play it. And I will play it on stream. Number two, you all know that JD Vance is going to be buying that game day one so he can fuck a couch, all right? We all know that is exactly what is going to happen, okay? He's going to go out and buy a Nintendo Switch specifically for this game. Yeah, what does the couch character in Date Everything look like?
Senator JD Vance, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us here in Cincinnati. Let's start off with the Democratic National Convention.
You know, someone really needs to talk with him about, like, hey, can you, like, sit up straight during an interview? Because, like, when you're leaning forward like that, it looks really weird.
Sure. Some of what we heard this past week, Vice President Kamala Harris, in making her case, said that the tariff plans that Donald Trump is proposing will hurt the middle class. Here's what she said specifically, quote,
The tariff plans, by the way, if I'm recalling correctly, are like a 10% or even 15% blanket tariff on everything coming into the country.
He intends to enact what in effect is a national sales tax, call it a Trump tax, that would raise prices on middle-class families by almost $4,000 a year. Now, the estimates vary, but how do you respond to that charge that Trump's tariffs would hurt the middle class?
Yeah, so if you step back a little bit, Kristen, there's this whole thing that Kamala Harris did at the convention where she made a bunch of claims about what would happen and not enough actually reflection on what already happened, right? Because Donald Trump was already president. He used tariffs to bring manufacturing jobs back to our country, and I think he'll do it again.
Okay, except he didn't bring manufacturing jobs back to the country. Like, the country lost record numbers of manufacturing jobs under Trump. Like, that's... The opposite is true.
And he did it while keeping prices extremely low. Because if you go back to the Trump presidency...
If I recall, like, we had to give billions of dollars to farmers because we got our asses beat in the trade war with China.
We had 12,000 factories that were built during Donald Trump's presidency. Inflation never really ticked above 2%.
I'm sorry. Just real quick, I do have to fact check that. Factories built in U.S. under Trump. Well, here is an article from 2020. We can reshore manufacturing jobs, but Trump hasn't done it. Huh. Weird. Or here's another article from 2020. Trump hails manufacturing miracle as factories bleed jobs. Let's see. Here's the Alliance for American Manufacturing. What did Donald Trump accomplish for American manufacturing? This is from 2021. So we have full, hindsight 2020. In the end, the former president's policies were mostly rhetoric. Oh. So he didn't do anything? That's crazy. There are fewer people working in manufacturing today than when Trump became president in 2017. That's remarkable because factory jobs generally grew year over year from 2010 to 2018. In the last 4 years of Obama's presidency alone, 386,000 manufacturing jobs were added. Throughout Obama's time in office, Trump repeatedly criticized him for betraying American manufacturing, but Trump made matters worse in many ways. Oh, damn, that's crazy. In fact, there was a drop of 543,000 jobs in manufacturing. Huh. That's crazy. One of Trump's biggest manufacturing wins, a promise extracted from Foxconn to build a massive new manufacturing facility in Wisconsin that would employ more than 10,000 workers, has turned out to be a glorified warehouse that will likely never fulfill its promise. Damn, good one, JD. Where are all these factories that Trump supposedly built?
His entire administration, in fact, was sort of, around 1.5% most of the time that he was president. So when Kamala Harris says, if we do the thing that Trump already did, it's going to be way worse than it was last time, I just don't think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, let's talk about
Sure.
Trump's record during his first term. He did impose rounds of tariffs, and it cost Americans nearly $80 billion
good
in new
pushback.
taxes. Do you acknowledge that imposing more tariffs will ultimately cost consumers?
Well, what it really does is it penalizes importers from bringing goods outside the country into the country. And I think that's just a necessary thing. We know that China and a number of other countries are.
Why is that a necessary thing? Like manufacturing here, what manufacturing does exist in the United States is reliant on imports of materials from other places on the planet. If you have a flat tariff on all imports, like that basically destroys the entire American economy. So much of American manufacturing domestically relies on parts made in other countries or raw materials from other countries, or there's a lot of stuff that comes into the country. And I also find it very rich. Just out of curiosity here, JD Vance, private prisons. Huh, weird. Private prisons have spent more on this election than any other in history. This is from 2020. I wonder, is JD Vance mentioned in this? Did he take money? Oh, JD Vance. You really? Let's see. Do we have data on 2024? I just want to know private prison. I want to know how much money he's gotten from private prisons. Here we go. Oh my god, it uses ChatGPT. Fuck this. Everything's so bad now. Here we go. Oh, private prisons under investigation by the DOJ. Love them some Trump/Vance. Let's see, from August 20th. Republican Senator J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's running mate, will be in Nashville next week for a fundraiser hosted by Core Civic CEO Damon Hinninger, Dan Crockett of Franklin American Mortgage, and Mike and Tina Hodges of Advanced Financial. Huh. Yeah. For those who don't know, Core Civic is a massive private prison company. And they're throwing fundraisers for Trump and Vance. Interesting. So, just out of curiosity, do you think J.D. Vance is aware that, like, prison labor is slave labor?
Are using into the country. And I think that's just a necessary thing. We know that China and a number of other countries are using effectively slave labor to undercut the wages of American workers.
Weird, because America uses effectively slave labor to undercut the wages of American workers.
Donald Trump thinks that has to stop. And again, what Kamala Harris is saying, Kristen, is that if you do this, you're somehow going to cause skyrocketing inflation. In reality, Donald Trump already did it. He brought a lot of jobs back, and it didn't cause inflation.
But it caused consumers to pay more. They paid more in taxes, $80 billion worth. So, do you acknowledge that consumers ultimately will pay more if there are more tariffs imposed?
So economists...
Do you just acknowledge that?
No, I don't, Kristen, because I think economists really disagree about the effects of tariffs.
If a company has increased costs that they can pass on to the consumer, they will. Like, dude, you're a capitalist. You know this. That's why he's flailing so awkwardly at this very simple question.
Because there can be a dynamic effect, right? So what some economists will say is what you just said, that it will actually raise costs for consumers. But what other people say, and I think the record supports what this other view, is that it causes this dynamic effect where more jobs come into the country. Anything that you lose on the tariff from the perspective of the consumer, you gain in higher wages. So you're ultimately much better off. You have more take-home pay, you have better jobs, and also we have more reliance. Because one of the things we learned during COVID, I don't, by the way, blame Democrats for this, but one of the things we learned during COVID, Kristen, is that if our supply chains are really brittle, if we depend on the Chinese to make too much of our stuff, then prices can skyrocket at a time of crisis. The economists who say that tariffs are bad, they don't take that into account. And we've all learned it the hard way.
And it is economists across the board, really. I mean, the Wall Street Journal says economic data showed that Donald Trump's trade war with China did not achieve its objectives of reversing the declines in U.S. manufacturing or reshoring factory jobs. I hear what you're saying. It's a complicated picture, but just on that bottom line point, you can't guarantee.
You know, I like her approach here, and I understand why she's, like, softening the blow here by saying, like, I understand what you're saying, but honestly, just point out that he's wrong and leave him in the lurch.
Of reversing the declines in U.S. manufacturing or reshoring factory jobs. I hear what you're saying. It's a complicated picture, but just on that bottom line point, you can't guarantee that Americans won't wind up paying a penny more, can you?
Well, I think that what you can guarantee is that if you don't bring more manufacturing jobs back into this country, you don't make our supply chains more stable, you're going to cause higher prices over the long term. I think.
Yeah, but a general tariff on all imports doesn't do any of the things you just said.
That is what is absolutely true.
But you acknowledge they could wind up paying more.
What I acknowledge, Kristen, is that unless we bring more manufacturing jobs back to this country, we are going to...
You don't bring manufacturing back to America. That's not how you do that. Like, this is like saying you take a left turn when driving by throwing the handbrake. That's just not what that does.
Into paying more in the long term. Remember, the whole promise, now, again, this was a bipartisan thing.
We could put massive financial penalties on offshoring manufacturing. We could put certain requirements for businesses to do business in America. You have to have X amount of material being sourced from American companies in America. You could, I'm just spitballing here, but you could maybe incentivize democratic worker co-ops which by their very structure are not going to offshore or relocate their workplaces. There are a lot of ways you can tackle this. Another one being, hey, you want to bring manufacturing back to the United States, maybe embrace the Green New Deal and make the United States a manufacturing hub for green energy for the entire world. These are things we could do if we actually cared about manufacturing. And at least some of those things might be done under a Harris administration, but zero of those things will be done under a Vance-Trump administration or a Trump-Vance administration.
My own party was as wrong about it as Democrats were, and Donald Trump was right about it. What they said is that if you shipped all of our manufacturing to East Asia and to Mexico, Americans would pay lower prices. Well, here we are.
And we do. We generally do.
Now, and Americans are paying higher prices. And just one more thing on this, Kristen, because it's really important.
Yet we're paying higher prices because companies are greedy. They're machines designed to make money. That's what they do.
Important to go at what Kamala Harris actually said in her convention speech. She says that she wants to stand up to China on behalf of American workers. If you're not willing to impose tariffs on companies that are manufacturing in China, using slave labor in China, you're not standing up to the Chinese.
Again, putting targeted tariffs on individual companies is one thing, but that's not what Trump has pitched. He's pitched a general tariff on all imports.
And Americans are really going to suffer.
And on pricing and prices right now, inflation obviously at its lowest level since 2021. But let's move on. Robert F. Kennedy, the big news yesterday.
Very big news.
He suspended his campaign, announced he's endorsing Donald Trump. He is also known as someone who has blamed vaccines for autism, antidepressants for school shootings, and recently said, quote, he won't take sides on what happened on 9/11. Do you have any hesitation about accepting his endorsement?
No, Kristen, I don't, because we're going to disagree on issues, right? There are things that Robert Kennedy has said that I disagree with. I'm sure there are things that he said, or that I've said, excuse me, that he's going to disagree with. But I think what his endorsement represents is that Donald J. Trump's Republican Party is a big tent party. I was raised by two grandparents who are sort of classic blue dog Democrats. They believed in having a border. They believed that you shouldn't have censorship in the United States of America. They believed in common sense economic policies. They may have disagreed with Donald Trump about tax policy, but they believed in some fundamental American values. And I think what RFK's endorsement really shows is that the Kennedy Democrats are actually more at home in the Republican Party of Donald.
They're not. Literally, his entire family has denounced him. He's not representative of Democrats. He's representative of, middle-aged to older divorced white dudes who resent their more progressive spouses who left them. That's who RFK Jr. represents right now. Like that's the demographic he speaks to. People who were already going to vote for Trump anyway.
Donald Trump, and unfortunately Kamala Harris's party, higher prices, doing nothing to fight back against the Chinese, to say nothing of a wide open border. That is not JFK's Democratic Party. It's not RFK's Democratic Party. We're thrilled to.
Yeah, but by the way, I don't know that Trump did a whole lot to fight back against the Chinese either, okay? Like, it kind of seems like he gave them a lot of money to have his daughter get a ton of Chinese patents under control. But, you know, what do I know, you know? Just, it's so weird how his children were so involved in his administration and made absolute bank off of it.
To have the Kennedy Democrats where they belong.
Well, and some in the Kennedy family have stepped forward to say that they sharply disagree with this endorsement. But let's just go back very quickly. He says he isn't taking sides on 9/11. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, of course I don't agree with that, Kristen. Now, to be clear, I don't know what RFK actually said there. Maybe there was additional context. Of course, you actually have to see what people.
You know, I'm not sure what that Marjorie Taylor Greene woman really said when she talked about the Jewish space laser. You have to really hear what someone has to say before you agree or disagree with it.
People say before you agree or disagree with it. I certainly have taken sides in 9/11. I'm the pro-America side. I don't think that we should have been attacked, and I certainly think hitting back against the terrorists was justified.
Yeah, but that's not what taking sides on 9/11 means in this context, man. When someone says that, they mean that, like, 9/11 was done by America.
I don't know what RFK said there, but what I do know is that RFK said a lot of very interesting and important things. That the Democratic Party has become too pro-censorship. That the Democratic Party, especially in the wake of COVID, became really anti-freedom and anti-child. I mean, you had Democrats saying that we should be masking toddlers in their schools, even though we knew it caused.
Does J.D. Vance have children? No, he does have children. He does, because he told his son to shut the hell up about Pokemon. So he should know this, but toddlers don't go to school. Toddlers like go to daycare. They might go to preschool maybe. But like a toddler at like 3 years old is like not going to school.
Developmental disabilities. I agree with RFK that that was crazy.
Well,
also, just to be clear, 1 million Americans died from COVID. 1 million, okay? And which groups of people were really affected by COVID? Again, was it the elderly? And what was the name of that other really vulnerable group? Was it like very young children, right? Also called toddlers. It was the elderly and like toddlers. Those are like the most vulnerable to COVID. So it makes sense to mask those people and around those people to make sure that they don't get the airborne illness that's spread by the water droplets you breathe out. It's not rocket science.
to be fair, there was a lot of information that scientists were grappling with as it came in, and masks were perceived to stop the spread of the disease. Let's move on.
Totally fair.
Yeah.
But the one thing before we move on that I would say on that is there were important leaders Donald Trump was among them, RFK was among them, who were saying some of this stuff is crazy. And if we had listened to them, I think our kids would have been much better off in the wake of the pandemic.
I mean, scientists did show that masks help to stop the spread of the disease. Let's talk about another big issue.
Disabilities for toddlers, right? We have to be able to.
Masks don't cause developmental disabilities in toddlers. That's not a real thing that happens. And I'm just going to throw this out there. If there were any short-term effects of wearing masks in like social situations, they'll get over it. Like, people have adapted to all kinds of crazy shit over the, hundreds of thousands of years human beings have been around. Okay? Like, women adapted to wearing stilettos all the time. All right? Like, we did that. You don't... we'll be okay. Humans are adaptable or they die, exactly.
To balance this stuff, and I think the way that RFK struck that balance was much smarter, unfortunately, than the way that Kamala Harris did.
Let's talk about another big issue that was talked about at the Democratic National Convention. It's being...
John Bainbridge, real quick. Apparently, one of RFK's children said that when she was a kid, her dad drove her down to the beach with a chainsaw and beheaded a beached whale, strapped the head onto their family car, and like drove down the highway with it. That's a whole thing. Yep, nope, that's real. That's real. Apparently, like, one of RFK Jr.'s daughters is dating Ben Affleck or something, and it came out in... why? Because she said her dad's obsessed with, like, animal physiology or something. It's really, really weird. Also, Autumn, thank you for the $20 super chat. I usually just watch the VODs, but wanted to pop in while you're live and say thanks for the edutainment. Well, Autumn, I'm glad you're enjoying the show, whether I'm live or not live. Thank you very, very much.
I usually just watch the VODs, but wanted to pop in while you're live and say thanks for all the edutainment, D.
You're welcome. I do try to do the edutainment, D. And thank you for supporting stream, setting an example for everyone else to follow.
Talked about on the campaign trail, abortion. Sure. Democrats made the case this week and beyond this week that Donald Trump, if elected, will impose a federal ban on abortion if he wins. Now, Donald Trump says he won't, but can you commit, Senator, sitting right here with me today, that if you and Donald Trump are elected, that you will not impose a federal ban on abortion?
I can absolutely commit that, Kristen, and Donald Trump has been as clear about that as possible. I think it's important to step back and say, what has Donald Trump actually said on the abortion question, and how is it different from what Kamala Harris and the Democrats have said? Donald Trump wants to end this culture war over this particular topic. If California wants to have a different abortion policy from Ohio, then Ohio has to respect California and California has to respect Ohio. Donald Trump's view is that we want the individual states and their individual cultures and their unique political sensibilities to make these decisions because we don't want to have a nonstop federal conflict.
Okay, but like we all know that you're full of shit on this one, right? Like we already know that, JD. Like you can't put the genie back in the bottle, man. It's already out. You guys have been talking amongst yourselves quite publicly for years now about how you want a federal ban on abortion. You got like some of the most influential people in the party talking about it. You got the Christian nationalists talking about it. You've got like basically a bunch of your leadership talking about it all the time. And the massive plan that you guys assembled to implement once Trump gets in office Project 2025 explicitly lays out that you're going to have a federal abortion ban. And like you can say, well, we're not going to have a federal abortion ban. That's crazy. We know nothing about Project 2025. We know that you're lying. JD Vance, you like wrote some of the foreword of Project 2025. Donald Trump has been like name dropped by all the leadership of Project 2025 as being on board despite public denunciations of Project 2025. On top of that, like every single one of these videos that we've been going over in the Project 2025 leaked training videos, and we will resume doing those in the next day or so. Every single one of those has a Trump cabinet official teaching you what to do when you get into office. Like, there's no way Donald Trump is not on board with this. He's their guy. Every single conservative think tank in America got together to write Project 2025. Those think tanks are funded by the same people who fund Donald Trump. Shit, there are more training vids? We've only gotten through like half of them, John Bainbridge. Oh, sorry. JD Vance wrote the foreword to the Heritage Foundation's President's Book. Not Project 2025, but I'm gonna say something maybe a little controversial, okay? The Heritage Foundation president, if you're writing the foreword to his book, you're co-signing Project 2025.
Over this issue, the federal government ought to be focused on getting food prices down, getting housing prices down, issues, of course, where Kamala Harris has been a total disaster. So I think Donald Trump is right. We want the federal government to focus on these big economic and immigration questions. Let the states figure out their own abortion policy.
Let me just follow up with you a little bit on that point, because I've been talking to Republicans, including Senator Lindsey Graham just last week, who've made it very clear that if Donald Trump is elected, if you are elected, they will continue to press this point. Senator Graham said to me, I'm going to keep saying that there should be a federal ban. If such a piece of legislation landed on Donald Trump's desk, would he veto it?
Well, I think it'd be very clear he would not support it. I mean, he said that explicitly. Yeah, I mean, if you're not supporting it as the President of the United States, you fundamentally have to veto it. So he would veto
a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly that he would. And
I don't
again,
think he's ever said explicitly he would. He said that to you?
Lindsey Graham, Kristen, I would be surprised. I mean, again, I need to see the context on what Lindsey Graham said, because Lindsey Graham himself has not advocated a federal abortion ban. Lindsey Graham has advocated a federal minimum standard. Now,
hey, fun fact about the Heritage President's Book that J.D. Vance wrote a foreword to. It was originally supposed to be called Burning Down Washington to Save America. Or rather, sorry, Dawn's Early Light, Burning Down Washington to Save America. Nearer to its release, it was retitled Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington to Save America. But, yeah. You know what? I think it's worth it. Let's read through, as J.D. Vance here is trying to distance himself and Donald Trump from Project 2025. Let's read the foreword that J.D. Vance wrote for Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington. Sorry, I just totally blanked on what the name was. Taking Back Washington to Save America. Let's see. In the classic American film Pulp Fiction, John Travolta's character, recently returned from Amsterdam, observes that Europe has the same consumer goods as America, but there it's just a little different. That's how I feel about Kevin Roberts' life. He grew up in a poor Kevin Roberts is the president of the Heritage Foundation. He grew up in a poor family in a corner of the country largely ignored by America's elites. But his corner was in Louisiana and mine in Ohio and Kentucky. Like me, he's a Catholic. But unlike me, he was born into it. His parents played an outsized role in his life just as mine did, and now he works far from where he grew up. Just a few steps from my office in Washington, D.C. He's the president of one of Washington's most influential think tanks, and I'm a U.S. Senator. Man, that's so goddamn damning. My God. Now he has written the book you hold in your hands, which explores many of the themes I've focused on in my work. Yet, he does so profoundly, and with a readable style that makes accessible its real intellectual rigor. Never before has a figure with Robert's depth and stature within the American right tried to articulate a genuinely new future for conservatism. The Heritage Foundation isn't some random outpost on Capitol Hill. It is and has been the most influential engine of ideas for Republicans from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump. Yet it is Heritage's power and influence that makes it easy to avoid risks. Roberts could collect a nice salary, write decent books, and tell donors what they want to hear. But Roberts believes doing the same old thing could lead to the ruin of our nation. If you've read a lot of conservative books or think you've a good sense of the conservative movement, I suspect the pages that follow will be surprising, even jarring. Roberts understands economics and supports basic free market principles, but he doesn't make an idol out of decades-old theories. He argues persuasively that the modern financial corporation was almost entirely foreign to the founders of our nation. The closest 18th century analog to the modern Apple or Google is the British East India Company, a monstrous hybrid of public and private power that would have made its subjects completely unable to access an American sense of liberty. The idea that our founders meant to make their citizens subjects to this kind of hybrid power is ahistorical and preposterous, yet too many modern conservatives make such an idol out of the market that they ignore this. A private company that can censor speech, influence elections, and work seamlessly with intelligence services and other federal bureaucrats deserves the scrutiny of the right, not its support. Roberts not only gets that at an instinctive level, he can articulate a political vision to engage in that scrutiny effectively. I just want to pause here and say, it's incredibly rich to me that in this forward, he's like, yeah, these companies wield immense amounts of corporate power and, wield an immense amount of influence over modern politics, while praising the president of a think tank that you have described as being instrumental in conservative politics. Think tanks are funded by private donors. Again, the fact that it is contradictory, it just doesn't matter because they're fascists. That's really what it boils down to. Doesn't matter that they're hypocrites. Roberts sees a conservatism that is focused on the family, and this he borrows from the old American right that recognized correctly, in my view, that cultural norms and attitudes matter. We should encourage our kids to get married and have kids. We should teach them that marriage isn't just a contract, but a sacred and, to the extent possible, lifelong union. We should discourage them from behaviors that threaten the stability of their families. But we should also do something else. Create the material circumstances such that having a family isn't only for the privileged. That means better jobs at all levels of the income ladder. That means protecting American industries, even if it leads to higher consumer prices in the short term. That means listening to our younger people who are telling us they can't afford to buy a home or start a family, not just criticizing them for lack of virtue. Roberts is articulating a fundamentally Christian view of culture and economics, recognizing that virtue and material progress go hand in hand. And can I just pause that and say, it doesn't, though. Like, virtue and material progress don't go hand in hand. You can get material progress without virtue. That's kind of the whole point of capitalism, actually. Absolutely wild. My childhood was not, by any objective measure, easy. Neither was that of Kevin Roberts. Both of us were negatively impacted by family instability, and both of us were saved by the resilience of the thick network of family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, that is often the first and most effective component of our social safety net. Both of us saw how a factory leaving a town could destroy the economic stability that provided the foundation for those families. And both of us learned to love the country that gave both of us and our families second chances, despite some bumps along the way. In these pages, Kevin is trying to figure out how we preserve as much of what worked in his own life while correcting what didn't. To do that, we need more than a politics that simply removes the bad policies of the past. We need to rebuild. We need an offensive conservatism, not merely one that tries to prevent the left from doing things we don't like. Here's an analogy I sometimes use to articulate what the previous generation of conservatives got right and wrong. Imagine a well-maintained garden in a patch of sunlight. It has some imperfections, of course, and many weeds. That's not a well-maintained garden. If it has many weeds, it's not very well maintained, but okay. The very thing that makes it attractive for the things we try to cultivate makes it attractive for the things we don't. In an effort to eliminate the bad, a well-meaning gardener treats the garden with a chemical solution. This kills many of the weeds, but it also kills many of the good things. Undeterred, the gardener keeps adding the solution. Eventually, the soil is inhospitable. In this analogy, modern liberalism is the gardener. The garden is our country, and the voices discouraging the gardener were conservatives. We were right, of course. In an effort to correct problems, some real, some imagined, we made a lot of mistakes as a country in the 1960s and 70s. Pray tell, what were those mistakes, JD? Please elaborate. But to bring the garden back to health, it's not enough to undo the mistakes of the past. The garden needs not to just stop adding a terrible solution, though it does need that. It needs to be recultivated. The old conservative movement argued that if you just got government out of the way, natural forces would resolve problems. We're no longer in this situation and must take a different approach. As Kevin Roberts writes, it's fine to take a laissez-faire approach when you are in the safety of the sunshine. But when the twilight descends and you hear the wolves, you've got to circle the wagons and load the muskets. We're now all realizing it's time to circle the wagons and load the muskets. In the fights that lay ahead, these ideas are an essential weapon. J.D. Vance. That's his foreword. His foreword literally ends with talking about doing a violence to overthrow the country, man. Cool stuff. Does that count as a threat? Vaguely, I guess. Anyway. Yeah, JD. But totally trust us, though. We definitely won't do a federal ban on abortion. Just trust us, bro. We'd never lie.
Now, to be clear, that is not Donald Trump's view. Donald Trump disagrees with Lindsey Graham on this, but no Republican, at least no Republican with any reasonable power, is saying that we should have a complete national abortion ban. I haven't heard that from any of my colleagues. And to be clear,
that's because you are lying. You're just lying.
Donald Trump, I think, has staked his position and made it very explicit. He wants this to be a state decision. States are going to make this determination themselves.
All right, let's talk about women voters more broadly. The Census Bureau estimates there are 22 million women between the ages of 20 and 40 who...
Like... You're just lying, man. Oh, I haven't heard any Republicans endorse a national abortion ban. You're just lying.
for whatever reason, do not have children. What do you say to those women who hear some of your comments, including the childless cat lady comments, which you've been asked about, but who feel as though you won't represent them?
Well, I'd say, first of all, I will represent you. I want to be the vice president for the whole country, and I want to represent everybody. And yes, I made a sarcastic comment years ago that I think that...
Yeah, I'm aware that you're all there in YouTube chat. I see you guys.
A lot of Democrats have willfully misinterpreted. But what I've simply said is that I think that it's really a profound change that's happened in our country where we become anti-family, and I would like to change that. And I think if you talk to young women, whether they have children or don't want to have children, what you consistently hear is that a lot of young women feel like they don't have options. I saw this with my own wife, who's a working mother, who's a very, very accomplished litigator. She has 3 beautiful kids and always felt like she was having to balance being a good mom with being the kind of litigator that she wanted to be. I just want women to have more choices. I've seen that very personally in my own family, and I think it's something that is broken about our country.
Let me zoom out a little bit. Then
Please.
you're calling it a sarcastic comment.
Sure.
I just want women to have more choices, says man dedicated to removing choice from women when it comes to abortion rights. Also, this is just from earlier today. The long and short of this story is that JD Vance bashed the president of the teachers union for not having her own children. And for context, the president of the teachers union was, I believe at the time, a lesbian woman. Yeah, attacked teachers who don't have children in remarks in 2021 that resurfaced on Tuesday. In his public comments, he reserved specific criticism for Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers. Quote, "You know, so many of the leaders of the left, and I hate to be so personal about this, but they're people without kids trying to brainwash the minds of our children." Vance said at a Center for Christian Virtue Leadership Forum moderated by conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt and group president Aaron Baer, October 2021. Okay. If she wants to brainwash and destroy the mind of children, she should have some of her own and leave ours the hell alone. Cool stuff. Weingarten, whose union endorsed Harris last month, spoke at the DNC last week in support of her presidential bid. Gross. JD Vance's comments are sad and insulting to millions of modern families and school teachers, including Catholic nuns, none of whom should be targeted for their family decisions, Weingarten wrote. That's a pretty classy response. Cool stuff.
And yet, some women, and you got the feedback in real time, felt like it was a gut punch to them personally. Do you regret making that comment?
Look, I regret certainly that a lot of people took it the wrong way, and I certainly regret that the DNC and Kamala Harris...
You doubled down on it, JD, like a few days ago. Like he's running away. Like, this guy is like the worst possible politician to shackle yourself to for Donald Trump. And frankly, I'm living for this. I'm living for this, guys. He's got no riz, and he is like, unironically, he's just the political sideshow Bob. He's just sideshow Bob in the rakes. If you guys have no idea what I'm talking about, because Simpsons is old as dirt, here, okay? It's a very classic bit. It's just This is JD Vance. This is JD Vance.
Lied about it.
But do you regret what you said, Senator?
Look, Kristen, I'm going to say things from time to time that people disagree with. I'm a real person. I'm going to make jokes. I'm going to say things sarcastically. And I think that what's important is that we focus on the policy. There are certainly going to be things that I say. If I'm elected vice president, people are going to say, well, I wish he had said that differently. I think it's most important to actually be the person I actually am and to say.
Nobody believes that the person you portray yourself as in your press appearances is the person you are, JD. You come across as one of the least, real motherfuckers I've ever seen.
Those sarcastic comments were made in the service of a real substantive point. This country has become too anti-family. It's too expensive to afford a house. It's too expensive to afford groceries. Donald Trump and I want to change that. And unless we get better leadership, we're not going to.
But again, just very quickly, given that people have told you directly, have spoken out, have said that they were offended, they were hurt by those comments, do you wish you never made those childless cat lady comments?
I think that it's much more important for me to just be a normal human being who sometimes says things that people disagree with. I have a lot of regrets, Kristen, but making a joke 3 years ago is not in the top 10 of the list.
All right, another big topic in this race is immigration. There has been a lot of discussion about Donald Trump's plans for mass deportation.
Yeah.
According to one estimate, more than 11 million U.S. citizens live in households with mixed immigration status, including more than 5 million children. If you and former President Trump were elected, would you separate families as a part of your mass deportation effort?
Well, we have to start with the foundational issue here, which is we have 25 million illegal aliens in this country right now because Kamala Harris has refused to do her job.
Very quickly, DHS says it's much lower. It's closer to 8 million. I don't know. Where do you get the 25 million from?
Well, I think the 25 million are the people that should have been deported that maybe weren't deported, plus you had another 12 to 15 million that have come in since Kamala Harris. Look,
DHS
whatever the number
disputes
is,
that number for the record. They say it's closer to 8 to 10 million.
But I think there are reasons to think that DHS is underestimating. Whatever the real number is, it's way too high, right? It's millions upon millions of illegal immigrants that have come in just since Kamala Harris.
I'm just a normal guy calling for mass deportations in America, the likes of which we, unironically, the likes of which we haven't seen since, the westward expansion and the genocide of Native Americans. That is what they are proposing.
Became the border czar a few years ago.
She was put in charge of the root causes of migration.
Well, the root causes of migration, I would say, Kristen, is that Kamala Harris refuses to do her job as border czar. And let's just start there. I want to answer your question, but I think it's important to sort of sequence this in the right way. So if you want to get control of the illegal immigration problem, you have to stop the bleeding. You have to stop so many people from coming here illegally in the first place. And that means undoing everything that Kamala Harris did practically on day one of the administration. You have to reimpose deportations. You have to stop catch and release. Stop.
What the fuck is a border czar? It's a made-up term. Kamala Harris, as vice president, doesn't have power to enact policy changes. The border czar is not a thing. It's a term coined by the conservative press. It's not an actual position. It's not something that has actual power. It is a term coined to make it seem as if Kamala Harris can do anything as vice president about the border. She can't. She doesn't have power to do that. That's not something the vice president can do. She was sent out to do media appearances related to border issues 3 years ago. That's the extent of it. She can't enact policy changes. It's a fake thing that's meant to trick you, or rather, not meant to trick you guys, because you guys know what is going on, but it's meant to trick people who just aren't engaged with politics, and then they hear the term border czar, and they're like, oh, well, Kamala Harris is the border czar, so she should be the one fixing the border. Harumph, harumph, harumph. It is her fault. That's the intent.
granting asylum to every single person who comes in here and says that they need asylum. And
Well, you can legally come here and claim asylum. That's what the asylum process is.
stop granting mass parole. These policies are why we have the immigration crisis that we have. So I think focus on fixing the problem. Before we even fix the problem, we've got to stop the problem from getting worse.
And as you know, President Biden passed a series of executive actions, and illegal border crossings are now at their lowest levels in about 5 years, so much so that Greg Abbott is no longer busing people to other cities. But let me ask you this fundamental question,
please.
Fundamental question. Will families be separated under your mass deportation?
And again, because you made a point here, I do want to answer this question about families and about deportations, but you made this point that border crossings are lower. Border crossings at the southern border are lower because the Harris administration is sending more immigrants through the ports of entry. So instead of coming through the southern border, they're now being flown at taxpayer expense to the ports of entry all over our country.
So that's a problem to you? Like, I'm going to gloss over everything wrong with what he said and just get to one specific point, which is, and I need you all to bear with me here, the problem he has here is that they're flying undocumented immigrants to ports of entry. Now, his complaint here is that that is too expensive and too much effort, and giving immigrants too much free stuff. So I have to ask, would it not be exponentially more expensive? Like, quantifiably more expensive to do mass deportations that would require, like, the building of logistical centers and concentration camps and processing facilities on a scale America hasn't never seen in modern memory, in order to facilitate the level of deportation that you're proposing. Like, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are proposing the largest mass deportation in American history. The deportation of anywhere from 6 to 10 million people. By their own estimates, up to 25 million people. And, guys, I don't know if you know this, but, it's really expensive to transport large numbers of people from one point to another point. And it seems to me that if your main problem here is that it's costing a lot for the current administration to move undocumented immigrants around, that problem is only going to get, like, 1,000, 10,000 times worse when you're suddenly trying to do that with exponentially more people. And I got to be honest with you, the fact that he casually is throwing around the number of 25 million people when, like, the actual estimates are like 6 million, 10 million, like, well, that kind of tells you that they're probably going to be looking a bit farther afield than just people they can confirm are undocumented immigrants. Like, don't they also want to revoke citizenship? It would not surprise me. The point of this is not to achieve any tangible outcome. It is to be racist. It is to assert white supremacy, and to that end, it doesn't matter if it's fair. It doesn't matter if they're right. They just want to get rid of the undesirables. You know, like, this is just like a policy that opens the door to untold numbers of abuses. Like, if you thought, like, the family separation policy under Trump was bad before, wait until suddenly you're doing it to tens of millions of people. They are just evil. It is just evil policy. This is, yes, this is literal Hitler shit. Like, if you actually look into what you need in order to facilitate the logistical transport and holding of millions, if not tens of millions of people, you are actually discussing, like, how do we recreate the logistical situations around the Holocaust. Like, it's unironically, like, yeah, we need to build the railroads. We need to build, like, the train cars to hold, like, the, prisoners. We need to, like, you're just recreating those same goddamn conditions again.
The number of illegal crossings, Chris, and this is a really important point, they're not any lower. They're just shuffling how the people are coming into the country in the first place. And this is very important.
They're able to process them more efficiently, but Greg Abbott's not setting them to other
Kristen,
states.
I don't want a border czar who makes it more efficient for illegal immigrants to come into this country. That's why we have the problem.
I would love for a reporter to ask JD Vance, what powers does he think the border czar has? Because if Kamala Harris is currently the border czar, then clearly JD Vance would become the next border czar. What powers would he have? I want him to actually, like, describe the border czar position.
Problem that we have.
Senator, to this question, because so many people want to know the answer to this, will families be separated under your mass deportation policy?
Yes. This is not a question. This is not a meaningful question. Because the answer is just yes. When you're deporting tens of millions of people, families get separated. You earlier mentioned that there are families, millions of families in the U.S. that have households of mixed immigration status. By default there, you would be breaking up those families.
Policy.
I think that families are currently being separated, and you're certainly going to have to deport some people in this country. Now, I think you start with I think you start with the most violent.
I understand it's a rhetorical question. I get that. I just really, really wish that instead of trying to put the ball in his court on that, you could just clearly point that out. Because your viewers need that clearly pointed out, and if you ask JD Vance whether that is the case or not, he's just going to tell you, like, in the most evasive way possible, well, kind of, but, like, it's already happening. Kamala Harris is doing it way worse.
Violent criminals in our country.
I understand it's a rhetorical question to make him look bad. I get it. I know how this works. I get that. The point I'm trying to make is I wish she would make the point instead, because she clearly knows the answer, and instead of throwing it into JD Vance's court to, like, manipulate and dodge the question, just answer the question. Him avoiding the question is his answer. Oh, is the thing he said his answer? Oh, wow. Incredible insight. I never could have told you that. I understand why it is being framed this way. But understand that when I'm complaining about it, the reason I'm complaining about it is because a lot of people who watch mainstream media don't get it. They don't walk away from this interview understanding the core conceit here. They don't walk away from this interview understanding that Republicans in our country are proposing literal Nazi shit. Like, And that's infuriating to me. And they don't understand it because the questions get proposed in this, like, sideways way. Because the mainstream media, and the journalists doing this, by the way, is doing it really well. But the main issue I have is that it's not being effectively communicated to people in a way where they get what it means. And you need to be able to communicate what it means. And no one in the mainstream media does that.
Those people need to be deported. That's where you focus federal resources. I think you, of course, have a number of children who are currently living with drug cartel members, not actually their families. We need to, of course, find their families and get them back to their families. But it's very...
We need to separate them from their families to make sure they're the real families.
Interesting here, because what Kamala Harris says is that Donald Trump wants to separate families. Kamala Harris's policies have led to thousands upon...
Thank you, Nomi. I never would have figured it out without that input. Thank you. I didn't really realize that interviewers could ask leading questions. Thanks.
On thousands of migrant children living with sex traffickers and drug cartels.
Well,
that is the consequence of her policies.
But there's not a policy to separate families. There's not a policy to separate families.
Oh, if you know that your policies will lead to family separation, you don't get to claim. Kristen, this is important. Kamala Harris cannot claim that she doesn't know that her policies are leading to family separation. They are.
Kamala Harris doesn't have policies. She's the vice president. She doesn't control border policy.
And everybody knows.
Like, this is the problem I have here. This is the problem of kicking the ball into his court. He's not going to play by the rules with the ball. He's just going to steal the ball and then try and sell it to you for $50. Like, this is the problem with asking rhetorical questions to bad faith actors.
And she has to take responsibility for that. That's what real leadership is.
There are some families who have been separated, as you say, some because their parents are criminals. But of course, under the Trump administration, there was a zero tolerance policy, which is an actual policy. But let's move on.
No, please.
Because we're running
I just
out
make
of
this
time.
point, Kristen, because this is so important.
We are running out of time.
There was a zero. I'll give you more time. There was a zero tolerance policy during the Trump administration, and that led to less family separation than under Kamala Harris's border policies. That's what's so striking about this. Actually.
What? Again, call him on his bullshit. She doesn't have border policies right now. She's the vice president. The vice president doesn't control border policy. Like,
enforcing our border is the most humane thing for children and certainly for American citizens.
But I don't hear you denying that families will be separated. Let's move on to something that Donald Trump said in North Carolina and yet again Friday night. He said, quote, "Our primary focus is not to get out the vote. It's to make sure they don't cheat because we have all the votes you need. You can see it." Why is Donald Trump casting doubt on the election before it's even happened?
I don't think that's what Donald Trump is doing.
Well, that's what he's doing.
It's what he did last time and the time before that and what he's doing right now. He literally, like, in an interview today, said something along the lines of, if Jesus were to count ballots in California, he'd win the state.
That's what he says here. We need to make sure they don't cheat.
I think that what he's saying is that we want to pursue a set of policies in the Republican Party that make it easier for every legal ballot to be cast and counted, but make it harder for illegally cast ballots to be counted. Now, we can disagree about how many of those there are, whether there are...
No, actually, we can't. If we disagree on, like, if on the one hand you're like, oh, it's like 3 illegal ballots cast, oh, it's like 6 illegal ballots cast, that's one thing. If the difference is between, like, oh, there's 3 illegal ballots cast versus 10 million illegal votes cast, well, that's a big difference. That's not a difference you can build a bridge over, you know?
a few hundred, a few thousand, maybe more. But just in the last week, okay, so just in the last week, once in Arizona and once in Pennsylvania, there were major court wins that make our ballot process more secure and more effective. I think that's what Donald Trump is talking about, is we have to pursue, sometimes through litigation, sometimes through better policy at the state or national level, a set of rules that make sure every ballot is legally counted.
You know, maybe JD Vance is onto something. Maybe we should have like some kind of, I don't know, Voting Rights Act protection. You know, we could reinstate that. You know, the Supreme Court allowed that to lapse. Maybe we could bring that back. You know, it seemed to work out well in the past when there wasn't all the rampant speculation about illegal voting. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, it's very different from your message, which is you said, and I'll quote you back to yourself, we have to work as hard as possible to persuade Americans to vote for us. Are you on the same page as Donald Trump? Because, again, he seems to be casting doubt on the results of the election before it's even happened.
Of course we're on the same page, Kristen. We talk all the time, and I guarantee you, if you sat here and said, Mr. President, Donald Trump, do you believe that we need to do, that your campaign needs to persuade voters as much as possible? Of course he's going to say yes. That's not inconsistent with thinking that we need to pursue a set of approaches that make sure legal ballots get counted, illegal ballots don't get counted.
Do you have faith the 2024?
That's already happening. Like that's already a thing. Like the rate of like illegal votes cast is like 1 in like 300 million. Like that's like the rate of illegal voting in this country. It's like ridiculously small.
For election will be free and fair?
I do, Kristen. I do think it's going to be free and fair, and we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that happens. We're going to pursue every pathway to make sure, again, legal ballots get counted. But I feel very good about where we are. I think we're going to win this race, and I think we're going to win it in a very good election.
All right. Senator J.D. Vance.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Likewise.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for watching.
What an actual ghoul. As far as it goes from like NBC, like that was a pretty decent interview. Not great, but it was pretty decent. How about just making more people actually want to vote for you? Well, that would be counter to their actual intention, which is cooling the number of the voter turnout rate, you know? They want people to not show up to the polls. Calling Vance a sea cucumber would be an insult to sea cucumbers. I don't know. He shares at least one quality with sea cucumbers, and it seems that, you know, he shits with his mouth.